Hello, friends. There's a perennial question that's going to haunt any nation, which is who gets to be counted as a member of that nation and who is excluded. So, in the case of America, the question is America primarily defined by blood and ancestry, or is it something else? Is it a nation of creed or belief? So, I'm going to explore this question with you because it's really important for defining the experience of people in America, but also because there's competing visions of what America should look like. I'd like to start off by telling you a story about a student who I had. I was a teaching assistant in political philosophy when I was in graduate school. And in a political science course or political philosophy course, you're going to have people with all kinds of beliefs. And even in this liberal, progressive college that I was teaching at, pretty much everyone looks different but thinks alike. And so there was a lot of uniformity, but there was a couple outliers of people who, for example, there was a extreme anarchist who didn't believe in any type of government. And then there's this extreme white supremacist student who was very smart and vocal about his views. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my dialogue with this person because I really believe in dialogue. I really believe in connecting with people and trying to understand why they think what they do and finding a process for seeking truth together. So this student and I were talking about the American Constitution, and we were talking about what it means to be an American. And that's, of course, a very deep question, but some of the ways in which that could be answered are different. So one of the ones is, as I mentioned, does what it mean to be an American, is that defined by ancestry and blood, as it is in many countries and many cultures? For this student, it was a yes, a resounding yes. To be an American is to be of basically Northern European ancestry because the founders were of that ancestry, of that ethnicity. And mine was no. I think if you examine the history of America, anyone can become an American if they follow the laws. America and its constitution and its principles are what define it. It's really based on beliefs that are primary. So to be an American is not about where you come from, but what you stand for. That was my view. So this basic question is what's dividing our nation as well amongst the factions that do believe that race is the most important thing about a person. So on the far left, it would be the racial essentialists who believe in the view that race is what defines a minority. And then on the far right, you have the racial essentialists who believe that the same is true for European Americans or white Americans. So I think there's a deeper question here too. So I think one thing that me and this student did agree on is that culture does matter. So the student and I both said yes to that because why? Even if I was correct that to be an American is not based on ancestry or blood or race, it still is true that America has a set of ideals that create a certain culture. For example, belief in freedom of speech, freedom of the press, due process under law. All those beliefs are part of America's culture. And so that's not going to be compatible with every other culture. So if somebody said, I don't believe in freedom of speech, I don't believe that everyone is equal under the law, etc., then that culture would not be compatible with American culture. So I think it's important to distinguish those two because oftentimes they're put together. People will say, no, America is essentially a place for persons of European ancestry. It's essentially a white nation. And the reason is because of all these beliefs. But you can disentangle that. You can say anyone can believe those things. They don't have to have a certain bloodline. And I think that is the Protestant origins of America. So America has this emphasis on belief and creed, and it's easily seen as a result of its inheritance from Protestantism, because other branches of Christianity and other religions don't have that view that's emphasizing belief and faith as much. So let's jump into that. And I hope I can provide you with some of this evidence. So blood-based citizenship is the default view of humanity. If you go throughout history and you go throughout many or most countries today, you're going to find that identity is primarily tribal. It's based on kin. It's based on your ancestors. So, for example, if you showed up to a hunter-gatherer hundreds of thousands of years ago and you said, hey, can I join your little group? Can I join your little community, nation, whatever you want to call it? They'd probably be like, no, you're not one of us. And I might say, can I become one of you? And they'll probably look at you weird and say, no, you can't become one of us. You're not part of our family, our extended family, our community. And so no matter how long I live there, I'm never going to truly belong if I don't have their dominant ethnicity. So that's also true for many nations today. And it's probably the default view in human nature, because human nature is naturally tribal. And psychologists have shown this even by flipping a coin. You flip a coin, you say, hey, you people over here are the heads group, you people here are the tails group. And those people will start basically preferring each other based on some arbitrary distinction. It's called the minimal group paradigm in experimental psychology. But here's some examples of blood-based citizenship. So in Japan today, citizenship is strictly based on bloodline. Even if you're born and raised in Japan, you can't easily become a citizen unless they have Japanese ancestry. That's not to say that it's impossible, but it's much harder. And naturalization is pretty rare. Less than 1% of Japan's population is foreign born. Similarly, in China, it doesn't grant birthright citizenship to non-Chinese parents. Explicitly, China will define its citizens in terms of what's called the Han Chinese ethnicity. So Han is one ethnic group amongst all the Chinese, but China does recognize some other minority groups as well. And this is also true for Germany until the year 2000 or so, around there, and South Korea today even. So if you're a Korean and you're living anywhere in the world, you can become a Korean citizen just by the fact that you have the blood, the ethnicity. So this is the default setting in human nature. And what's rare about America is that it bucked this trend. And here, G.K. Chesterton in 1922, a famous writer, wrote, America is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed or a belief system. I think it is a really rare example of a founding an experiment. It's almost like a philosophical or theological or moral experiment that America is. It's a very rare experiment. And I think it's been successful. And that's why people look to America as a leader in that way. So America, of course, started by these Puritans, these Protestants in England who came here. And John Winthrop was one of these founding members. And his description of America is as a moral covenant. So he describes it not as an ethnic homeland. He didn't say, hey, this is a place for all these British people, all these Northern European white people who are Protestants to come here. No, it was, we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill. And he's using biblical imagery to describe a covenant. And a covenant is an idea from the Bible in which you have a certain relationship with God. And a covenant is different than a contract or a business contract because it has this transcendental quality and it has a meaning that transcends generations. So, for example, the analogy that's given by Winthrop is similar to the biblical covenant that Israel has with God. So, America as a covenant community has this analogous relationship to Israel's relationship to God. And it's not a land for one race, but a people united by a moral commitment, which becomes embodied in the Constitution, is what defines America. Now, you might say, isn't Israel a ethnic community? Yes, in that sense, that's true. But these Puritans were Protestant, this covenant to all of humanity, as we'll see with some of the references I'll give you. So even though Winthrop is giving the analogy of the Israelites' relationship to God, because he's a Protestant, he's universalized that covenant as Christians do. So the social contract that anyone can join by accepting its principles and laws is the key thing. So it's a social contract, and it's about principles and laws. It's not about ethnicity. America's founding documents, that, for example, if we look at the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. So being created as equal, as humans under God. And the basis of that equality for these Protestants is the fact that they are endowed by their creator with these rights. So God-given rights, not state-given rights, not rights given by the government, not rights given by your blood, not rights given by your ethnicity, but by God. And God has a unique relationship to humans where all humans are equal under God. And that's embodied in the Declaration of Independence, which combines Enlightenment thinking with biblical thinking. And as I mentioned, these rights are thought to come from God, not ancestry or the government. And then we see in the Constitution a couple of years later, it defines national identity by laws and principles, again, not by ancestry. There's no mention of racial or ethnic identity as a requirement for citizenship. So in these two founding documents, we see a precedent. And then later on, you see the naturalization clause defining who can naturalize to become an American citizen. It gives Congress the power to establish uniform laws of naturalization, allowing anyone to become an American, given the fact that they're following all these laws and principles. All right. And then, of course, where did these founders get these ideas? They're getting them from the biblical influence. In Genesis, in the Old Testament, all humans are created in God's image, which is something that both Jews and Christians believe. That's all of humanity, not just any particular ethnic group. And there is neither Jew nor Greek, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This is in Galatians. The idea being that Christianity is attempting to, via Christ, universalize the covenant that Israel had with God. And under God, there is neither Jew nor Greek, and all are open to salvation. Similarly, in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, it says the four residing amongst you must be treated as your native born. Just think about how radical that is. The foreigner residing amongst you must be treated as your native born. And this is ancient Israel. This is an ancient culture. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So there's this reciprocal relationship and compassion in Israelite religion where we see emergence of this ethic, which was embodied in the American founding as well. And the founders talked about citizenship much more in this principled way. Jefferson notes the bosom of America is open to receive the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions. America is supposed to be a refuge for people of all backgrounds. It's not supposed to be based on ethnicity, but the belief in liberty. And that has been such a beacon of hope for so many people throughout history. John Adams notes our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And I think if you look at, so again, citizenship is about moral and religious principles. That's the core of what it means to be an American. And Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers, was actually born in the Caribbean, and he became a founding father. So that's another example of the early origins of America. If you look at immigration history in America, it's been open to all. Of course, in the beginning, there was also this 1790 Naturalization Act. It was an initial law limited in its way to free white persons, but later this was corrected by the 14th Amendment, which granted birthright citizenship based on the principle of universal human dignity. This established birthright citizenship, ensuring that anyone born in the United States soil is an American regardless of ancestry. And if you look at what happened in Ellis Island, if you think of this 60-year period of mass immigration, millions of immigrants from diverse backgrounds became Americans. So there's a precedent in America's immigration history as well. Think about what people say when they become an American. On this sacred day, they naturalize themselves. I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The Constitution and the laws of the United States are what are important. And this solemn commitment is to its ideals and its ideas. It's not a birthright issue. It's a choice. So I think that's really important. That's really important to remember. So you have this connection in the practices of American citizenship and the ideals that are coming from the Bible and the Enlightenment to make America's practices consistent. Similarly, when we do the Pledge of Allegiance, it's not to a king, it's not to a particular race or to a particular land, soil. It's to a set of moral and spiritual beliefs. We're one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Liberty and justice for all under God. So the Pledge of Allegiance is consistent with the practices. And the reason I think this matters is because nationalism can be based on many different things. It can be based on a communist utopia, like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, or the Soviet Union, or China, where class warfare is what matters. Your identity is based on your class. It can be based on a race, like with Japan. But America is so unique because it's founded on these biblical principles, these Jewish and Christian principles about the equal worth of humans. Again, it's this creedal identity, not racial identity. Everywhere you go, you're going to find people obsessed with their race and their tribe. America's founding is really unique in this way. And because the founders were Protestants, there's this focus on belief and principles and moral values that are what matter. Similarly, in Protestantism, it's faith that makes somebody part of God's people in Christianity. It's not their ancestry. Similarly, belief in the Constitution is what makes somebody an American and following its laws, not bloodline. So you see this kind of parallel between Protestant theology and Americans' civil religion, which has been noted by many historians. Any person can become American by embracing the Constitution's ideals and following the law. Of course, you have to follow the law. And this is where the white supremacist and I disagreed in terms of blood being important. but we both agreed that culture does matter. And that's the Protestant founding of America, that beliefs and moral values are primary, and that America is a constitutional republic. It's not a monarchy. It's not based on having a king or queen. And it's not based on being an ethnic state. Your race doesn't matter in terms of citizenship. And I like this quote from Ronald Reagan, the president, in 1989, where he said, "You can go live in France, but you cannot become French. You can go live in Germany or Turkey or Japan, but you cannot become German, Turkish, or Japanese. But anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American." It's that vision, I think, that's inspired so many people. And similarly, that because of this Protestant work ethic, meritocracy is really important. If you work hard and you achieve something, you're going to be rewarded. And that is often not been the case because of some kinds of corruption and so on. But the ideal is what matters, that you can look to that ideal and say, wow, there's a place that really cares about meritocracy and achievement and hard work. And it's not going to judge you based on your race or class or religion. It's going to really focus on your moral self. And I think that's like a secular translation of those Protestant ideals. And as I mentioned, culture does matter. So what do I mean by that? Because of this Protestant influence, which prioritizes belief, we see this secular version of it in the Constitution, that beliefs and values are really central. For example, checks and balances and a separation of powers to prevent tyranny. We know that we have these different branches of government for a reason, because the idea is that you have to separate executive, legislative, and judicial power, because otherwise you get tyranny. They have to check each other. That's an amazing innovation that America was a leader in because of this assumption that we get from the Bible, Jewish and Christian theology, that humans are fallen and sinful and not good by nature. Because if you thought that humans were angels and you thought that humans were naturally good, if you just left them alone, they're going to do amazing cooperative things and they're going to help each other by nature, which I think anyone who's had a child, how could you believe that? If you ever raised children? So that belief that comes out of the Bible has a direct influence on the kind of government that people create. So a lot of anarchists, for example, they believe that human nature is really naturally good and some kind of emergent order will result in people naturally cooperating without checks and balances. And a lot of communist ideology was based on this view of natural mutual aid and cooperation and the goodness of the workers, etc. But in practice, it didn't work out because they got human nature wrong. So a lot of the socialism and communism failed because of that reason. The reason I think America is still standing and is successful in many ways is because it has an accurate view of human nature that has come from the Bible. Checks and balances are really important. As Madison said, the latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, meaning people don't fight because of some outside problem. Like, we just didn't get society right. We didn't fix society. If only society wasn't oppressing humans, they wouldn't be fighting. It's in the nature of us. It's in the crooked timber of humanity. Another quote of his is, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. That because humans are fallen, they're selfish. They're also good, but they're also selfish. They're not good by nature. They have to be made to be good. Ambition can correct other people's ambition. One person's selfishness can correct another person's selfishness, and you can have something that's socially good. Another cultural belief is in individual rights. And we take this for granted because most places have collective or group rights. So your status and your ability to ask for things and to be protected from certain kinds of harm are based on which tribe you're in, who's your father, who's your mother, which community are you in. And of course, under communism and socialism, this was also a different version of group rights where people were treated differently based on whether they were workers, farmers, bourgeoisie, intellectuals, professors, capitalists, etc. So they were persecuted or given rights based on their group's membership under communism, which was not such a good idea. The idea of individual rights is very unique in a culture because our natural tendency is to be collective and because we're social creatures. And this assumption arises because of the biblical belief that starts in Genesis, where it says humans are made in the image of God, that humans have an inherent worth and dignity. So, for example, under Nazism, there were no individual rights for members of Germany because people's rights were based on their racial group. If you're one race, you have certain rights, and if you're another race, you have another set of rights. There's no inherent worth or dignity that's going to trump all these racial groups. It's just based on blood. And similarly, under communism, your rights were based on whether you were in the proletariat or the bourgeoisie, the capitalist or the working class. So there was no inherent rights that people had to not be treated poorly in either of those secular ideologies. But America is different. It's a different culture. Also, equality under the law, equal protection under the law. So regardless of group background, sex, or race, people are equal under the law, meaning they have an equal right to representation, to being protected by due process, and so on. Of course, these are all aspirations. It doesn't mean that it's always achieved, but at least the culture has the aspiration, whereas other cultures don't even have the aspiration. Due process of law means that multiple checks are there to prevent wrongful punishment. There's appeals when somebody's found guilty. There's fair trials. There's being judged by a jury of your peers. There's legal representation. People have a right to a lawyer. There's a right to not incriminate yourself. All of these features of American culture exist because of the assumption that people are self-interested, biased, and they're going to abuse their authority, which arises from this biblical view of human nature, this non-idealistic, non-romantic view of human nature. So because people are going to be biased and self-interested, we know that people are going to abuse their authority. They're going to persecute their enemies. They're going to persecute the people in other tribes, other races, other communities, and they're going to collect power for themselves. So the legal system has to have these checks so that nobody is guilty until proven innocent. They are innocent until proven guilty. We don't believe anybody's claims about harm in the legal process until there's a due process, there's a trial, and there's evidence presented, and then people are presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. Without that, you get a very different culture. So in many other cultures, that's not the case. There isn't this elaborate legal system. It's a miracle that it ever even evolved. Similarly, the freedom of speech is so rare. I would try to suggest, if you don't think that, try and write a newspaper article in another country, Go to Vietnam or Turkey or North Korea or Mozambique or wherever you want to go. Try and write a op-ed in a newspaper in another country. Of course, America has its problems too. We have censorship by big tech, and we have censorship by the government, of course. But the reason you can file a lawsuit when you see censorship is because of this ideal in this culture. And because of this, we allow offensive, controversial, and critical speech in America. Even in Europe these days, they're cracking down on free speech for the sake of social harmony. And social harmony is a default in human nature. It's natural for people to want to seek social harmony. And that's always the reason why people crack down on free speech. People aren't cracking down on free speech because they're just trying to be mean or evil. They're doing it because they have another culture in mind. They have another moral value in mind. They don't see it as persecution. They see it as protecting social harmony. That part of America's culture is fairly unique. And democratic elections, have you ever been to other societies where people don't believe in this? It's a one-party state, or it's a monarchic rule. There's like a king and queen, or there's some kind of despotism or tyranny where there's Saddam Hussein in Iraq. He would run elections and he would always get 99.9% of people voting for him. It's just like this miracle. So you have this one-party state. So the integrity of elections really matters. The fact that they're democratic, everyone gets one vote, everyone's vote counts, but everyone's vote only counts once. And of course, again, there's this ideal. It doesn't mean it's always achieved. There's always corruption, but at least we have this ideal in the culture. Freedom of religion is also pretty unique in America, part of the culture here. We don't believe in a theocracy or a state-based atheism. So freedom of religion means the government doesn't impose any metaphysical worldview on you. It doesn't impose like communist-based atheism, secular naturalism. It doesn't presuppose Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam. The government is supposed to be promoting the free exercise of religion and not establishing any particular thick metaphysical worldview, including atheism, including non-belief. So the government can't be compulsing belief or non-belief. And that's very different. So in France, there's state-sanctioned atheism. In, of course, Saudi Arabia, there's state-sanctioned Islam. If you go to Israel, Judaism is very important in the government there. And of course, in communist societies, there was state-sanctioned atheism. If you look at the constitution of Pakistan, for example, Islam is part of the government conception of itself. And there's many other examples, but America is unique in this way, and some other countries have been equally inspired. The founders saw faith as a universal principle because of their Protestant background, not a random ethnic trait. So they thought of it as worthy of protection. So if faith was not something that was in everyone, but expressed differently, it wouldn't be something that would be worthy of protection. If it was just some random ethnic thing, oh yeah, those people over there, they have this kind of religion, they have this kind of faith, other people don't. It's not as deeply enmeshed in the way a government's going to protect a part of human nature. Similarly, freedom of the press and assembly, this is really important because without a free press, you really don't know what's happening in the society. And again, of course, there's corruption, there's problems, there's censorship. Our press is very divided. There's so much ideological corruption in our press, but still, there's an ideal in the culture that can be pointed to. Personal freedoms, of course, America is known for its emphasis on liberty, freedom, self-reliance, autonomy. And in a lot of other societies, that's just not a value. It's not an important value. It might be there in a small degree, but it's not considered one of the primary values. That you get to be the master of your own destiny, the captain of your own ship, but also you're responsible for a lot of things that happen to you too. So you have this unique blend of ideas in the culture. So I hope this has been helpful. I really hope this has made you think deeply. And if you have found this to resonate, and if I've hopefully challenged you or made you upset or happy, I'll be happy either way. So check out this other video if you're interested, and feel free to join my free newsletter called The Pursuit of Truth. Take care.